The illustrious Jabba bids you welcome. I'm going to regret this.
I'm Pete Mitchell. He's Peyton Jones. And this is the Church Planter Podcast, brought to you by Church Planter Magazine. Hey, Church Planter, this is Pete Mitchell, and I am here today with a very special guest, a guest you all know if you've been listening to the podcast for, I don't know, about 200, 250 or so episodes, a man formerly known as White Tyrone.
I can be White Tyrone again. It got hard. You're the White Tyrone. Yes.
Well, what's funny is, okay, so if you can't tell everybody, Peyton is out this week, so I got a much better person than Peyton. I got formerly known White Tyrone, and we met at Exponential. What year was that? Do you remember?
It had to be like 2014.
Okay,
I think it was.
Wow, it's a while ago.
Yeah, it was like right after Church Hill came out.
And you were like, yeah, I'm the only White Tyrone you're ever going to meet. And like, that was how we knew you. So we're like, Hey, it's White Tyrone. We kept talking about you on the podcast. And then, hey, don't call me White Tyrone on the podcast anymore. Okay, it's the guy formerly known as White Tyrone.
See, this is why. Remember, with friends like Pete and Peyton, you don't really need enemies. So, I'm sorry, enemies.
I see what you did there.
It's a tough crowd.
So anyway, what I asked Tyrone onto this podcast for is I wanted to talk to him about kind of a facet that, if you listen to last week's podcast that I did with Dave Negri here on Church Planter Podcast, it was our crossover episode that we did between Contractor Secret Weapon and Church Planter Podcast, and we talked about mission or business as a mission field. And so we're kind of continuing this theme here. And Tyrone has been a church planter, a pastor, a missionary, a software salesman, a business growth consultant. He's gone through my business growth consultant training a couple of years ago now.
Which I still use to this day with everything that I do.
Yeah. And so that's kind of the topic that I wanted to talk about. And also even the idea of, what's it like going from, being a pastor, church planter, which was, you were not full-time because you still had a regular job, right? Or a regular bivocational job. And then you're not doing that work right now, but you're still a pastor. Like, you are still Pastor Tyrone. Like, almost every time I hear about you, when I see you on Facebook, I mean, who you are, your walk with God, your desire to share God with others, you take that with you everywhere you go. So I kind of want to look at that dynamic of still being a pastor, but you're a pastor in a different way now than you were before. So, just kind of with those opening thoughts, give me some of your first thoughts here, some of your first, things that you wanted to share about this whole idea and this topic.
Well, first of all, my hat's off to everybody that is this church planting right now, or is doing some church revitalization, any kind of full-time vocational ministry work. I want to make sure that what I'm going to say might sound like I'm not behind that. I am totally, absolutely 110% behind that. And I think it's needed, and I think it's needed now more than ever. But, what was interesting about transitioning from doing that full-time, I was a full-time missionary. I was a full-time church planter, but I was also working full-time when I was doing that. So when we were missionaries, I had to work a job so I could have a visa. Now, it wasn't, 40 hours a week, but it was enough hours so that I could show that I was actually actively working within that country. And then when we were church planters, I had to work not only my as a church planter, but then I had to go and get a part-time job or a full-time job so I could make part-time money because that's the way it went. And then finally I was like, no, I'm going to do this bivocational consulting work. And I still use a lot of the course material that you provided, Pete, today, even in my interactions as a software salesperson. But, I was doing all that. And then I really felt that God called us out of that to go back into corporate America. And part of that is just a realization that, we oftentimes confuse ministry with being a vocation, not a calling. And we're all called to be ministers of reconciliation. Right. We're all called to be ambassadors of grace. We're all called to make disciples. There's no super believers, right? We're all called to this. And so to that extent, God used that time for us stepping out of it what we're doing right now is probably the hardest missions field I've ever done. So,
and let's talk a little bit about that. What are you doing now with your family? Let's talk about your family right now, because I think this is an interesting story for our listeners to hear.
So my wife and I had always had a goal to adopt. In fact, when we were dating, it's one of the things we talked about. Hey, how many kids do you want to have? I had a crazy number. She tried, she made me a little bit more realistic. I was like 8. She's like, how about 3? And as we had kids, my wife was like, let's adopt. And so we had an adoption that failed. And then we actually ended up going into fostering, and we fostered a total of 5 kids. We had 2 sets of siblings. And when I came back into the business world and was able to kind of catch my breath and spend more time with the family, that was really vital time. My wife and I started praying about adopting again. And we just adopted 3 boys. They are 14, 11, and 9. And they're great. I mean, we already have 2 biological daughters, but now we have a house full of, 3 boys, and the house is much louder than ever before. So I don't know if that helps at all, but yeah, that's the story.
Where are they from?
They're from Colombia.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
South America, the country, not the city.
What? I kind of want to talk about this only because I think a lot of people will find value in this. In that, you adopt a 14-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 9-year-old from another country, take them from their country, their home, their environment, their language, their food, their friends, their school, whatever. I don't even know what the school is like in Colombia. And you transport them to where you're at in South Carolina. How has that transition been for them?
Well, the important part to remember as the parent is that it's always harder on them than it is on you, because, this is home base. So the benefit for us is we had been missionaries, so we'd kind of experienced some of that. But, for them, it's there's definitely a grieving period. Things are different. Food is different. What you can get is different. Christmas is different. New Year's is different. Everything is different. Mom and dad say no. You cannot do this. You cannot do that. Mom and dad have different rules. It's been a real challenge for them, a real struggle. And so keep them in prayer. They're great kids and they're coming along, and they're also 14, 11, and 9. And so part of it is just remembering they're kids. They're gonna make mistakes. In fact, do you want to hear the great saying we have in our house?
Yeah, let's hear it.
We say, necesitamos ser perfecto. No, ¿qué necesitamos? Intentarlo y mejorarlo, which in English is, do we need to be perfect? No. What do we need to do? We need to try and then improve. And, it's been one of those cool things. God just kind of gave that saying to me, and we worked on the boys, and now they know it. Even when I screw up, I lose my temper, or the other day I burned chicken on the grill. It was awful. It was like a crematorium.
That's an offense of a totally different nature.
That's right. It was almost unforgivable.
Tell everyone what you shared with me right before the call, because I thought this was a really interesting concept. So in your desire, your goal, your intention to build your relationship with your 14-year-old, you do a special activity with them every week. Tell them what that is.
Yeah, so we, if anybody here has ever done the Love and Respect class, he talks about how guys function better side to side, and women always want to converse face to face. And so my wife and I would get in the car and we go out for a ride, and man, I would just open up, we talk for hours. So we took that lesson, and my oldest son and I we were butting heads. And so I said, "Hey, buddy, I'm going to hop in the car and go for a ride. You want to come with?" And he said, "Yeah." So went for our first ride was an hour and a half. Now our weekly ride's about half an hour to an hour. And we just sit in the car and we talk. And usually I ask him questions about like, "Hey, how's life different?" Or "How is school going?" Or, "It seems like your brothers are driving you nuts. You can talk to me about it." And he talks. I mean, he's not a talker. He's unlike me. He's not a talker. But we get in the car and yakety, yakety, yak. It's awesome. So I said to him, "Hey, this is my favorite time of the week." And he goes, "Mine too." It was really cool.
That is cool. So see the difference between where you live and where I live. You go for an hour and a half in the car and you hit 3 different states.
Yeah.
I go for an hour and a half in the car. I go to Irvine, like 20 miles away. That's just kind of the difference between you and me.
Don't you have a Dodge Charger Hellcat?
Yeah, but not a Hellcat, but it
Is it
doesn't
Dodge
matter.
Charger?
It's the freeways here. I mean, they're so loaded. We're just basically in a parking lot.
Well, just I showed your car to my boys.
Okay.
Because they have radio controlled cars, and they were like, "Oh, I like the Dodge. I like the Dodge." And I was like, "Oh, my friend Pete has one." I showed him. You had it on Facebook, out at the range.
Yeah. Awesome. Nice.
Yeah,
I love it. Well, that's great, man. I appreciate you sharing that because, adoption is when you adopt an older kid, it's tough. It's tough on everyone. And I think it's a very neglected area. I mean, I look at Peyton and I have talked about this on the podcast, the stats of kids that age out of the foster system and what they go through between sex trafficking and suicide, drug overdoses. I mean, it is staggering. It is depressingly just something that'll just make you cry. It's so bad. So, I mean, I love what you're doing, you and your family. I love the fact that your kids are willing to go through this, to all of a sudden go from being an all-female house to a majority male house.
They're not happy about it every day, but
of course.
So funny story. Boys don't always shut the doors behind them as hard as they should when they go to the bathroom, and that has led to more yelling.
That's so funny.
So
yeah, I love it.
I think that's actually an area where people they don't see that ministry aspect. We talked about it earlier. A lot of times people will see ministry as one thing and work as another thing.
Yeah.
Right. And it's whether it's 1 Corinthians chapter 10 about doing everything unto the Lord, or it's Genesis chapter 1 where God tells us to be fruitful and multiply and have dominion over everything. I mean, work is a healthy part of our lives. Well, as part of that, so is raising your family. So is, taking care of the widows and the orphans in their distress. I mean, all of that's holy. And I think, honestly, that's one of the areas where I'd really like to see the church pick it up is, hey, I mean, after these boys are out, Rachel and I've already talked about maybe adopting out of the foster care system and adopting a 17 or 18-year-olds. Because, that's like the crazy idea of, just here's a random stat for you. 2% of the globe is deaf. 2% of everyone on the earth is deaf. Of the deaf population, only 2% are following Christ. Like, there's an active, vibrant ministry we could be doing. The same thing with foster care kids. I mean, so many kids in foster care are not following Christ, and especially the 17 to 18-year-old range, because that's when all the temptations of life come upon them. They've already been hardened. So I didn't mean to maybe take us down that rabbit trail, but
no, but I think it hits on what I really wanted to get to, which is this idea of you being a pastor and having a ministry outside of the traditional way that we look at it in America, which is, you plant a church, right? These are all church planners primarily who listen to this podcast. And okay, great. Now I'm a pastor, right? Because I planted this church, or I'm getting ready to launch, I'm doing my thing. But that's not the only way. That's not the only way to do ministry. So talk about, how do you live out your ministry in your work, in your job? So like, you sell software right now. What does it look like for you to be a Christian and sell software?
So, I think it's the same way that is, just being a Christian and digging ditches, right? It's looking at work and realizing that it's a calling. It's looking at work and realizing that it too can be holy. And then trying to follow what God tells us about work in the workplace. So every day I read a proverb. And so many times, in fact, I keep talking about writing a devotional about based on Proverbs, and I need to just start it as a process. Maybe you and I should talk at the end about you keeping me accountable for that. But this idea, so many times God talks about being diligent, not having a slack hand. One who is lazy is akin to the destroyer, right? It's that sense of like trying to walk in holiness. When I'm working, I try to literally think, how would Jesus handle this job, right? And sometimes I outright fail, right? I yell at my coworkers, or I think very angry thoughts about people, right? But for the most part, I'm trying to live and work and parent and be a husband as I would think Jesus would do it, right? I guess that's the epitome of being a Christ follower. And the great part is then that's how you make disciples. So a couple years back, I led a Muslim to the Lord, and he was a coworker of mine. And the way I led him to the Lord was his dad had been a Muslim, his mom had been a Christian. He was on the fence his entire life. He had almost been killed when he was younger. He'd gone through a really hard time. His marriage wasn't the best. And he saw the way we were working together, and he goes, dude, how do you do this? And I just had a chance to share Jesus with him right there. He came to Christ, and he goes to church now and in the city that he lives in, totally praises God every day.
So is that the way? Because one of my questions was going to be, okay, so when do you take the opportunity, or how do you look for the opportunity to bring Jesus into the conversation? Obviously, when someone goes to a church, they know what they're going to get there. The problem is most people who go to church already know who Jesus is. I guess that's not a problem, right?
Right.
But if your goal is to reach the unsaved, if your goal is to reach people who don't know Jesus, you're not going to be able to do that in a church.
Right.
It's just that's not the world in which we live. You people who come to church are already saved for the most part. Maybe one or two people, and then of course we got Easter and a little bit at Christmas. You're going to actually reach more people out in the marketplace than you will in the church.
Absolutely.
So how do you look for these opportunities? Because I know you, right? Like, you called me up the other day, left me a voicemail saying some really nice things, hey, Pete, I appreciate you, that kind of stuff. That's who you are. Like, that's a big part of your personality. Like, I just imagine you probably got your list of top 5 people, and you're like, all right, this week I'm calling these 5 people and, saying something to them. I mean, so how do you look for these opportunities to share Jesus with people who don't know Jesus? So,
can you hold this 1 second? Would you mind shutting that door? Sorry, my youngest daughter's coming to hang out with me, which is totally awesome. And a couple of my other family members are making a little bit of noise, so I was having a hard time hearing. I apologize. So I guess, part of it is being purposeful, right? And then the other part is being sensitive. So, it really took it took a while for me to be at this job, for everyone to understand that I was going to achieve, right? I was going to do what it took to be successful, and that I was going to do a good job. Because people watch your work, right? If you come in and you only share Jesus and you're not working, these people depend upon each other, right? Within a company. They depend upon their coworkers to have integrity, to get their work done, to be successful, because other people depend upon you, especially in your sales, to provide work that they can then fulfill. So I think that was the first thing I did, is I decided I was going to go in and I was going to do as good a job as possible, because immediately people are like, so you were a pastor? And it's just like, how did you find, oh, I stalked you. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's great. And then, trying to find places where it makes sense to then bring up Jesus. But a lot of times it was loving them with the love of Christ without mentioning Christ.
Interesting.
And then, as things would come up, someone talked about how somebody in their family was sick. And I'd just say, hey, could I pray for them? Hey, how's your life going? How can I care for you? What can I do to help you? Is there anything I can be praying for? And then a lot of times open doors. And then sometimes people say, hey, I'm thinking about getting back to church. Or, I've got questions. I don't understand this whole Jesus thing, right? What do you believe? And I've literally had people ask me, what do you believe? Like, what are your thoughts on these things? And so we just get a real conversation. But once again, the difference between being a pastor, a full-time vocational pastor, or even working in a nonprofit that helps people, but it's a Christian nonprofit, and working somewhere else is, working somewhere else, you got to prove who you are first before anyone will give you any kind of, benefit of the doubt, right? I don't know if that makes sense, or if I'm just talking out of my ear.
Yeah, no, I get it. So do you ever do like any lunches or dinners with coworkers and stuff like that, and then use that as an opportunity? Or I don't know how it plays out, so I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, so most times it's not that much is not purposeful. Hey, let's go talk about Jesus. Most of the time it is you're spending enough time with these people and a need comes up. Hey man, my mom just got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and we are at our wit's end. Would you mind praying with us? Yeah, of course. I have a coworker who is not a believer. Part of it, and I'm trying to be really vague because I want to honor people,
of course,
privacy. But they almost lost a child, right? And I was one of the first people they called, and so it's less of, and maybe this says negative things about me, and maybe I need to really pray about it. But I've been doing less of, hey, let's go out for lunch and talk through the 5 spiritual laws, or the 4 spiritual laws. I would add a 5th one of discipleship, but walking through the 4 spiritual laws, or hey, let's walk through the Romans road. And it's been more, hey, let's walk this through together. And then most of these people I work remotely, so most of them are living in other cities. So literally, I try to be aware of churches that are in their area that they would connect well with. So.
How the transition of going from being a church planner to not being a church planner and being full-time business, as opposed to full-time business and full-time church, as you pointed out.
Yeah,
it's always full-time when you're in church. How did that transition go down as far as friends and family? And the reason why I bring this up is I know there are a lot of people who have that fear, right? Maybe they've been planting a church, or they're thinking about planting a church, or they're like, hey, I'm just not reaching the people I thought I was going to reach. And they want to get into their community. I think about, we've got a church planner here locally, Paul Percy, who is known as, or at least was known as Produce Paul, because he worked the produce department at the Smart and Final. In fact, he quit the job he had at, I think he was working at a Christian school, and went to go work at the supermarket because, excuse me, he wanted to work in the same community that he was a pastor in. Like,
right.
He wanted to reach the people. And there are a lot of guys who are like, I've been trying to do this church thing, and, I'm bivocational, or maybe I got a small church and I've been, full-time at it, but, we got to go bivocational. And there's a sense of fear. And there's also a sense of, how do I tell my friends and family this is what I'm doing? And I remember specifically, you called me up one day when you're like, hey man, I'm closing down the church plant, and I'm moving out of Florida. And the sense that I got, maybe this wasn't the sense that you intended, but the sense that I got was he's afraid of what I'm going to think, partially because I've been supporting the church, financially. And I'm thinking to myself, I bet you a lot of people have a problem with this. Like, I didn't, right? Because I'm like, dude, look, God called you there while you were there, and now if God's calling you somewhere else, you're somewhere else. I don't give a rip. I mean, that's not me. That's God calling you. I got nothing to do with that. So, but I was thinking about that because as we were having that conversation, I was like, man, okay, people have an issue with this, and that's why he doesn't know if I'm going to have an issue with this. That's why he's approaching it the way that he is.
You're right.
What is that like when you have those kind of conversations with friends and family?
I will say that that it went a lot better than I thought. There were a couple of people that were like, "Oh, I can't believe it." And then
I think I remember you saying like one person had given to the church and they felt like, "Oh, I've wasted money or something." And I mean, I can't remember exactly, but yeah.
I mean, we definitely, there are a couple of people that said that. Well, gosh, what are you just going to turn tail and run? It was like, are you kidding me? But the best part was the people on our board who said things like, dude, I think it is. I think it's a wise decision. I think it's about time. In fact, I'd had people begging me. So I had a friend, Danny, who said to me, hey, if your board really cares about you, if you're still hustling like this at the end of 2 years, they'll tell you to shut down the church. Like, you can't keep going like you're going. And I told him, Danny, I said, I'm going to do this as long as God will let me. I will continue to press on. And almost in that year from the moment he said that, I had influenza, I had mononucleosis, I'd had diverticulitis twice, I chipped a tooth, and all within a year. And I was exhausted all the time. And so it was a really tough thing. So the people that were connected, that knew what was going on, they all kind of got it. And the people that were upset, they would have been upset anyways. Right. We'd had a couple that was pretty upset. And I understand that. I honor them. I bless them. But I had to do what God was calling me to do. And if I was
were they active in your church, or were they just supporters of your ministry in the church?
Both. Okay. So it was just
probably even a sense of an abandonment on their part, right? If they were active in that.
Yeah. And so there's that sense of how do we make this work? How do we yes, I haven't tried, handing over everything to someone else and saying, hey, take this, run this. And no one said, yeah, we want to, right? And so that was kind of the difference, right? I was like, well, okay, let me get this right. You want me to keep doing something that no one else wants to do. Including
you.
Including me. Yeah. Including you. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Them.
Yeah. It was pretty rough, but the truth is, I think the ultimate thing is if you're called to it and then you're called to something different, it's honoring that, right? Because most people think, hey, I'm called to this for a lifetime. Most people don't work a job for a lifetime, right? And I think, you'll hear pastors say, I had a pastor say to me, well, Moses never retired. I'm like, you're right. Moses never retired. That's absolutely it. But, Paul moved on from one place to another. Barnabas moved on from one place to another. And those guys, it was just a different time and place. And I'm not responsible for being Moses. I'm responsible for being me.
Right.
So,
yeah. No, I get it. And I think that's a really tough conversation that pastors got to have when they're like, hey, you know what? Now I'm being called to something else. I'm being, another direction I need to go in. And, I think about my own family, my father growing up. There was a couple of different times where my dad had to leave full-time ministry. In fact, that's when he became a school teacher and he worked at juvenile hall, was because I didn't know this at the time, but I think the story is that the church hadn't been able to pay him for like 6 months. So we got like 6 months without an income. And he's like, look, I need income. I got to take care of my family. I got to go get a job. And that can be really tough for people to to deal with. And there's also this sense of failure, right? That sense of, oh, I failed. This is what I was called to do. This is what I was going to be doing. And I dropped the ball. I didn't do it. That transition that you made. Hey.
Sorry. I just want to throw this out here.
Yeah.
You asked, what did my family think about it? And so I was like, I wrote a quick note to Bella. I was like, hey, do you want to share like what it meant for you when I said, hey, we're going to be getting out of the full-time ministry and moving? And I asked her to kind of keep it short, maybe 30 seconds, but
Sure.
You want to share about that?
Sure. It was very interesting because we had been missionaries for pretty much as long as I'd been alive. So it was definitely something different, but I knew that we'd keep sharing the gospel no matter where we went, because that's just my dad. My dad's the kind of person, if he sees somebody and he has a Bible in his trunk, he's like, hey, do you want a Bible? Here, God bless. Here's $20. God bless. Like, I hope God like helps you in your life. And there's a homeless shelter 3 blocks down if you need somewhere to go for the night. It's really good. I know the people. Tell him Tyrone sent you. He's that kind of person. So I knew that we'd share the gospel anywhere we went. And he's a big inspiration why I'm where I am today as a Christian. So, yeah, I love you too.
Awesome.
I'll be taking her to Starbucks later, just so we know.
No.
No. All right.
How old are you, Bella?
I am 16, sir.
Great. Good job. Well, that's so awesome to hear. I wanted our listeners to hear that, I hear a 16-year-old, their opinion on that, their take on that. That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Love you, sweetie.
I'm going to put my second.
Sounds good.
No, that's great, man. That's really, really awesome. I appreciate you taking the time to share all this, because that's what I kind of wanted to give our pastors the freedom to think about, to understand, to feel, to have this conversation, to talk to their spouse about it, to talk to their family about it is sometimes it's God calls you to something else.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's time to move on. And our number one most downloaded podcast was something, I think it was titled How to Know When It's Time to Quit.
I listened to it. Just,
Yeah. But I mean, it's like,
yeah,
that is something that is always on the mind of probably every pastor, and certainly the church planner, certainly the bivocational, because of that dual pull that you've got. But what I kind of wanted people to get from this is, having known you as long as I have and worked with you, doing the training with you, seeing you use all of that information, now you use it for another company. I wanted people to understand that they can still be a pastor in a different capacity. You don't have a congregation necessarily, right?
Right.
But you're still in ministry. And that's really what I wanted people to understand, is you can still be in ministry. And like you said earlier, that's actually what we're all called to do, right?
Yeah.
And realistically, you look at the church, you look at the guy up there on stage. If he's full-time, he does not talk to as many non-Christians as you do, the guy who's working full-time in the audience.
Yeah.
You're the one that's really got the reach, really got the power. And that's really the benefit of being a Christian out there in the marketplace.
I would challenge everyone I know, every church planner I know, because I was one of them, that sits at a Starbucks and thinks that that's engaging your culture. It's not. It's not. Because I get it. It gets you out. It gets you, especially out of the office. It's better than sitting in an office waiting for people to come to you. But I really do believe that doing some form of work outside of your church is powerful. There was a pastor in Fort Lauderdale that basically told his entire staff, you all have to have a part-time job. I'll pay you full-time, but everyone here has to have either start their own company or go get a job somewhere else and do something else. And his point to them was, you need to be able to reach the culture. One of the pastors, actually, I love this, ended up leaving the church and running his company full time, because he had something like 10 or 13 employees that were working for him full time, that he was helping provide a great living for, that he was leading to follow Christ. Like he did, he was open about his faith at his workplace, but he had as much of an impact, if not more of an impact, on all those people and their families and their friends and all of his customers that ranged all throughout Florida, right, than he did as an executive pastor at his church. And that's just because, and don't get me wrong, I think, hey, if you were called to be an executive pastor, please do so, right? If you're called to be a full-time vocational pastor, please do so. But if you're on the fence and you're wondering, where am I at? Well, maybe God's going to use that work, right? Because work can be right. The work that you're doing to reach the lost, right?
Interesting, man. I love it. Well, hey, in closing, I'm going to go back to our hardcore church planting days. I'm going to ask you a really important question. You're about the same height as Peyton Jones. If you and Peyton Jones were to get into a physical fist fight, who would win?
Oh gosh, it is so hard. I would.
Of course you would. Of course you would.
I'm just letting you know I couldn't help it. No, Peyton is leaner and more fleet of foot, so he could probably, if he could hold on for a good 5-10 seconds, he would win. But if I had the benefit of my extra weight, hey, by the way, anybody who's not checked out Pete, what are you calling it? The
americasfitnessclub.com.
If you've not checked that out, you need to. I lost 10 pounds, and I've been getting to better shape. I feel better. I feel stronger. I have to get serious about it because I took a 2-week vacation, and one of the great things about the program is it's, hey, you know what? You have to live your life. Christmas, Thanksgiving, you got to do those days. The important part for us is on this 2-week trip, I had Christmas 4 times. So I lost 10 pounds. I won't say how much I gained back, but now we're back and serious with it. So check out americasfitnessclub.com.
Hey, man, all I can say is I'm down 85 pounds.
You look good.
I tell you, I feel good. Good.
So I see you're able to do so much more in terms of shooting. You've got probably a lot more energy.
My goal is what's called appendix carry. It's when you conceal carry, but you carry basically with the gun pointing towards, the family jewels, shall we say. You can't do that when you got a gut. So, you got to get rid of the gut. So that's what I tell the guys at the range.
Or you just aim it awkwardly.
Well, it's you wear a holster, right? But I mean, it's definitely
appendix carry.
It's called appendix carry.
Well, so Rachel gave me for our Christmas dancing lessons, right?
Oh, nice.
Which I love. It's great, something for her and I to do together. But I thought she'd give me something like that, and I thought it was a conceal and carry class. So I think for Valentine's Day, I'm going to get her and I a couples conceal and carry class.
There you should go, man.
Yeah. Nothing says I love you more than
that. Would be a great marketing idea for local ranges. I got to share that on my From Concealment podcast.
Yeah,
it's got to have like a Valentine's Day shoot with your honey day.
That's it,
honey.
That's it. Get a dozen roses in a box of snub noses, right?
Oh, dude, there you go. A dozen roses in a box of snub noses. That's awesome.
Nothing better than that.
I love it. Well, hey, Tyrone, thank you so much for being on this podcast. And as a special treat, guys, if you got some value out of this, if you would like to get a transcript of this podcast, one of the things that we're going to start doing is we're going to start giving you guys the transcripts. We're going to do at least this one free. We'll probably move it to a paid service, but right now this is a free one. All you got to do is text our episode number, just the number 343, into our phone number. I'm going to put this in the show notes, but that phone number is 562-553-0004. Again, episode number 343 to our phone number 562-553-0004, and we'll get you the transcript to this episode. So with that, Tyrone, thanks so much for being on with us. I appreciate it, man.
Hey, thank you so much, Pete Mitchell. Can I say one last thing?
Please.
Oh, boy. Church Planter Podcast. You can't beat it.
Now everyone knows where that sound effect came from right there. Thanks, Tyrone. Thanks for joining us for another weekly episode of the Church Planter Podcast with Pete Mitchell and Peyton Jones. We'd love to hear your comments on this episode of the Church Planter Podcast. Visit us online and let us know what you thought at churchplanterpodcast.com. If you subscribe to us via iTunes and have enjoyed the podcast, leave us a positive review. The more positive reviews we receive in iTunes, the more iTunes will promote us to other church planners who would benefit from this show. This podcast is brought to you by the Church Planner Magazine, which is available in the iTunes newsstand or online via churchplannermagazine.com.